Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is our third annual Concept of Progress. I'm Brother Marcus T. McCullough, a member of Theta Iota Lambda, chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, also known as the Springfield Alphas. And we are broadcasting live from Springfield, Massachusetts. We're here in our Zoom space. We're also broadcasting to our Facebook page, and we are really, really appreciative for you taking a moment to be with us today. Our third installment of A Concept of Progress will focus today on trauma and justice, and we'll introduce him in a little bit. But our speaker today is one of my prophytes, someone I'm very proud of, Brother Reverend Dr. Keon S. Payton. But first, we want to have a wonderful poem from our, I'm sorry, forgive me for being out of protocol. First, we're going to hear from our president, Brother Jason Asarifi, who will greet us at this time.
Thank you, Brother McCullough. Once again, thank you all. Welcome to our third annual Concept of Progress. As we're coming out of this season of COVID and trying to get back to some semblance of normal life, we have to realize that we're dealing with a lot that came out of this period of time, right? It was an unprecedented medical scare. However, simultaneously, there was a social awakening, right? A social reform awakening that was happening, where we saw some of the most controversial politicians ever take place in office, but that stirred up something that had been sleeping within our community and our people. And in this time now, there's never been a louder call for justice, equality, and reform. So as we deal with the traumas left by COVID, and we're trying to step forward, we have a bigger challenge ahead of us, right? And how do we learn to deal with this trauma as we navigate everything that is before us? So once again, I welcome you. I hope this is a very fruitful conversation that helps, even if it helps anybody take one single step forward, it will be a job well done. So once again, thank you, Brother Payton, for being here with us, and thank you, Brother McCullough, for putting this program together.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Brother President Asarifi. We're so honored by your presence as well. One of the things that we like to have in our Concept of Progress event is involvement from some of our undergraduate brothers. And so to share one of our treasured Alpha poems with us, the Vice President of the Alpha Kappa chapter and a relatively new initiate to our dear fraternity, Brother Talon Pope. Will you come now?
Hello, everyone. For those who don't know me, my name is Talon Pope. I'm a Fall 22 initiate of the Alpha Kappa chapter of Alpha Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. Now I'd like to welcome everyone and begin with the poem. Invictus by William Ernest Henley. Out of the night that covers me, black as a pit from pole to pole, I think whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. In the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced nor cried aloud. And under the bludgeonings of chance, my head is bloody but unbowed. Beyond this place of wrath and tears looms but the horror of the shade, and yet the menace of the years finds and shall find me unafraid. It matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul, Invictus. Thank you, brothers.
That is awesome. Thank you so much, Brother Pope. Thank you for your willingness to be here with us. Again, to all of you, we are so glad you are here with us for this third installment of the Concept of Progress. This is a social justice program and really a Black History Month program that our chapter started back in 2021. And we are continuing to keep it going. And as our president said, there is so much to talk about by way of progress and justice that we need. From the history book, our treasured history book, The History of Alpha Phi Alpha, A Development in College Life, I'd like just to read the opening paragraph of chapter 15 entitled The Concept of Progress. With the dawn of the mid-century, there was the realization that the fraternity could move with progressive influence and action into the areas of education, citizenship, and public service, with more complete organization and concentrated efforts by the general organization, the delegates of chapters, and the individual brothers. The concept of progress had been characteristic not only of the fraternity, but also of 20th century America, for it was descriptive of the development and expansion of the nation and of the onward march of the Black people from slavery and depression to freedom. There was a fundamental belief that one of the evidences of life was progress. Such progress was not of the continuous type, which seemed to go forward directly in a straight line. There were bypaths, turnabouts, slips backward, and the marking of time. But over the long run, there was the march onward and upward. The concept of progress reminds us that we as alphas and as all of us in our community are to strive for better, are to push forward, are to make wonderful things happen. Here in TIL, this is our third installment. Our first two were wonderful, wonderful, wonderful events and occasions. Our first one, Brother Reverend Dr. Rasan Hall, among the other things that he told us, he was from the racial justice coordinator for the Massachusetts ACLU at the time. He reminded us that progress is not linear. And as much as we want to participate in the political process, sometimes that is not the best or certainly not the only way to achieve the progress that we seek. Last year, Brother Dr. Matthew McCullough, Assistant Dean for Graduate Enrollment at North Carolina A&T State University, he reminded us how important it is to help our young people with STEM, which he introduced STEAM, science, technology, engineering, art, and math. And he encouraged us to mentor and to provide a space for young men and women to try and fail and to support them. And now for our third installment, we welcome the one I introduce now to push us to the next level, Brother Reverend Dr. Keon S. Payton from the Institute for Trauma and Economic Justice. Let me tell you just a little bit about who he is. First and foremost, he is a member of our dear fraternity, initiated into Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated through the Alpha Rho chapter at Morehouse College, fall 1998 as a member of the Anastasis 25. Brother Reverend Dr. Payton has earned a Doctor of Ministry degree from Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary at Northwestern University with a focus in strategic leadership for Black congregations. He graduated from Morehouse in 2001 with a degree, a Bachelor of Arts in Religion and Philosophy, and has an MDiv from Princeton Theological Seminary. He's also got special certifications in nonprofit management from the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern, theology and racialized policing and justice reform from Howard, and he's a master trainer of trainers, and he's going to talk about this in adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, from ACE Interface, founded by Dr. Rob Anda. Reverend Dr. Payton, Brother Reverend Dr. Payton, founded the Institute for Trauma and Economic Justice. It was a vision of his after years and years of public service, civil rights activism, and pastoral leadership. He's inspired by our brother and fellow Morehouse alumnus, Brother Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And one of the things that has certainly impressed me on a personal level about Brother Payton, not only is he my prophyte, but he is willing to speak about how trauma has affected his own life and how he sees trauma affecting the communities. He bridges in such a beautiful way spirituality, religion, theology, with an understanding of trauma, including mental health understandings, and even his connection. He's able to make connections with how justice is sought about and brought about in the community. So he's just such a fitting person, I think, for this, our third installment of the concept of progress. We're so proud, we're so honored to have you, Brother Dr. Payton, Brother Reverend Dr. Payton, and we will look forward to hearing from you now. Let us welcome Brother Reverend Dr. Keon S. Payton, our third speaker for the concept of progress.
Wow. Well, first of all, let me just say I am elated, super excited to be here today for many different reasons. But first, let me say to you, Marcus, thank you, dear brother, for your leadership and your vision in allowing these types of spaces for discourse. Certainly to president of this chapter, President Asarifi, we thank you for generously and graciously inviting us to be a part of such fantastic work, great work that you guys are doing there in Massachusetts. And certainly to our young brother, Brother Pope, we are very excited about you and your future and aspirations in criminal justice reform or criminal justice. But most certainly, I fully appreciate it. I said I was excited. Those are the first words, because your poem is one of my favorite poems, but it also really does bring this conversation full circle. I'm here today to talk about trauma. And when you look at my background screen that we have here, literally, it's the image of the blackness, the darkness, the desolation, oftentimes the perceived despair that people find themselves when they find themselves in the context of trauma. But we believe that because of the tenacity and because of the audacious faith that you were able to recite through that poem, Invictus, is a reminder that we are the captains of our fates and our souls. And so you see in the midst of this Blackness, this gold resilience that shines forth through that. And we believe that our organization, in understanding and also treating and preventing trauma, we are here to provide that hope and that progress for our community. So thank you again for inviting us to come and share today. Most of who I am has already been very kindly introduced by Brother Marcus, and thank you for that kind and gracious introduction. So I'll just shoot right into it. Back in 2019, I will say, I've been in pastoral ministry for almost 20 years now. I've been in the ministry for 30 years. And in the middle of my ministry, where I currently serve, my home church in Pontiac, Michigan, where I was born and raised as a young child and started ministry at the age of 14, I became very frustrated as a pastor because I looked at all of the challenges that were confronting the African-American community. And because I'm a person of deep faith, I believe that when Christ said that he gives us the keys to the kingdom, that the gates of hell should not prevail, that we have authority to take back our communities and to take back our families and to provide the type of leadership and progress that is needed for our communities to thrive. And I believe that the church, our HBCUs and our Black churches, I believe, have always been the central institutions of power for our communities. And so I was frustrated as a Black pastor, having gone to a Black school at HBCU at Morehouse, to feel that my influence was not moving the needle in the way that I desired. And so I began to ask the question in 2019, what's going on? And I was inspired by the song of Marvin Gaye, that song we all know very well, What's Going On. But if you ever watch that video of the song, it's in the context of the devastation of the community of Harlem, New York. The scenes of that video are showing the drug addictions, it's showing the violence, it's showing the storefront stores and the liquor stores on every corner, et cetera. But then in the midst of this panoramic view of what's happening in the city, you also see churches pretty much on every corner. And I'm sorry if I'm hearing an echo or sounds like there's a, there we go. Thank you, brother, for muting there. But if you look at the video, there were also churches on almost every street corner. And so I began to ask the question, what is going on? And that was in 2019 when I decided to go back to make my own personal improvements with my education. And so I started the doctoral program in strategic leadership at Garrett Evangelical Seminary. And I stumbled across this transformative research that I had never heard of before. And it was called Adverse Childhood Experiences, better known as ACEs. And my trajectory down the road of matriculating at Garrett and better understanding ACEs and now becoming a master trainer of trainer in ACEs, my experience of being a pastor, being on the front lines of people that we deal with every day who've been impacted and affected by trauma, I decided that this was something that was so important that we need not only to ensure that our churches are making being made aware of their awareness of ACEs and their impact in our communities, but also that we do work to educate all of us who are really working together in community to make our communities better. There are communities across the nation right now that are becoming trauma-informed states as a result of this ACE science that I'm about to share today. So these traumas that we're talking about, adverse childhood experiences, we now know, and it's been confirmed with scientific evidence, that they sustain a vicious cycle of drug use, teenage pregnancies, sexually transmitted diseases, violence, incarceration, suicides, and even paralyzing ambivalence that all contribute to the inequitable viability of economic mobility, particularly in Black communities. And so the mission of the Institute of Trauma and Economic Justice, better known as ITEJ, is to break the cycle of trauma in communities one city at a time by bringing together the collective resources of that community to repair, reward, reconcile, and renew those most affected by trauma by introducing evidence-based strategies that eliminate those barriers to equitable health and prosperity. And because this is also focused not just on ACEs, but also how it translates into justice. Brothers, we as African Americans make up the largest population in our prisons today. And there is a direct correlation between incarceration and adverse childhood experiences. And I'm going to pause right there and make preparation now to share my screen, where I want you to give your attention to this short video that will show you the direct correlation between adverse childhood experiences and those who are incarcerated. And please just read this until the volume will eventually kick in.
It's time now, everyone. We're gonna do the compassion trauma circle. Is everyone ready to face their past with compassion? Is that a yes? While you were growing up, during your first 18 years of life, if a parent or other adult in the household often or very often would swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you, step inside the circle. If a parent or other adult in the household often or very often pushed, grabbed, slapped, or threw something at you, step inside the circle. If a parent or other adult in the household often or very often ever hit you so hard that you had marks or were injured, step inside the circle. If you often felt that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special, step inside the circle. If your family lived in extreme poverty, step inside the circle. Step inside the circle. Step inside the circle. Step inside the circle.
There is no shame. There is no shame. There is no shame.
I'm so good. Good to see you. How are you? Amen.
Well.
Well, good to see you. Welcome. I was abused as a young girl. I was beaten by my mother. I was verbally abused by my mother. I was sexually abused by another man. My father was an alcoholic. My mother was a rageaholic. I've driven drunk. I've sold drugs. I was a juvenile delinquent. Probably my story is similar to most of your stories in here. I'm white and I'm female and nothing happened to me. So, I got a get out of jail free card. And so I'm here now because I see myself in every one of you.
I'm a traumatized child raised by a traumatized child. My mother was traumatized as well as her parents.
Like he said, we wasn't born in the world of being evil people. My mother didn't want me. She hid her pregnancy. She tried to flush me down the toilet. But as I learned about these things, I always asked myself what was wrong with me.
I come to the circle and I see everybody else and she's reading off the questions and people stepping in further. I look at my childhood and I'm like, a lot of these people in this yard were just like me.
There was one step I should have taken that I didn't take. And I saw some of my brothers and my friends take that step. And I felt like such a coward You know, I wasn't brave enough to be there with them when they took that step. And every round after that, I took the most difficult step.
Our traumas kept us separated. We were all on the circumference, all standing apart. But once we began to acknowledge our traumas publicly, it brought us all closer together.
In prison, you're not supposed to show your weaknesses in prison, though. But to want to do that, to walk in that circle like that, and to take each step forward was a reminder to ourselves that we still have a humanity and we worthy to be loved, though. Most people on the outside don't understand that we want to change so we can re-enter society better than what we left it.
And I think one of the things that when you was yelling at no shame and you had us yelling it out, it was freeing us too. And it was a point to where when I was looking at that and we was all looking at it in a circle, you can hear that echo, no shame. And that was very powerful, especially coming from a little lady like you.
I'm 76 years old. I done seen a lot. I don't like talking. I like to meet people that understand what's happening without words. And you one of them. Today has been one of the best days I had in my whole entire life since I've been out here these 40 years.
All right, brothers. So I want to transition now to, let me stop sharing and I'm going to share another screen here. Okay, and there we go. All right, so we're talking about adverse childhood experiences, and clearly we just saw the correlation there and how it impacts so many people. But oftentimes we don't get to the root of our traumas because of the shame and the guilt associated around our traumas. And so it's so critically important that we begin to engage the work of developing safe spaces where these types of honest, transparent conversations and discourse can take place. And so again, I want to thank you, Marcus, for your leadership in allowing us to have this conversation today. So at the study that you're looking at has determined that early adversity in life increases physical, mental, behavioral challenges later in life, particularly when left untreated. The ACE study confirms with scientific evidence that this adversity has a direct correlation with those things that we mentioned. You should know that the ACE study is the largest of its kind, with over 17,000 participants who took part in this study. It was developed and co-sponsored by Kaiser Permanente and the Center for Disease Control, and the co-principals for this study were Dr. Robert Anda and Dr. Vincent Felitti. Dr. Robert Anda, who approved the work that we are presenting here today, is a partner in our organization as the Institute of Trauma and Economic Justice. The questions that you heard the woman asking in the beginning of that video, did this happen to you? Did this happen to you? Those questions are a part of what was developed by Dr. Anda and Dr. Felitti as called the ACE questionnaire. It's a 10-question survey that you answer these 10 questions, and each time you answer yes, that determines your ACE score. Oops, let me go down to the slide I want to show you. This is a part of a longer study that maybe we'll do later with the chapter. So, but the slide that you're looking at here talks about the progression of one's life based upon the adversity that they experience early in life. And so what we are talking about is in the context of African Americans, right? We have a historical context of trauma rooted in slavery, segregation, Jim Crow, present day discrimination, like what we're seeing with the truth about our history wanting to be suppressed in places like Florida. These are historical traumas, but also intergenerational adversity. That, as you heard the young brother in prison talk about, he was a traumatized child who's trying to raise a traumatized child, whose mother was a traumatized child. Because now we know that trauma is passed down from the context of one's historical trauma as well as intergenerational adversity. Children are watching what our parents are going through and how they cope with the things that they go through. Mothers who are pregnant, when they are exposed to toxic stress, which means that they are experiencing stress more than 20 minutes at a time, that toxic stress is causing a toxic chemical that's being released from their brains to through their bodies. That's also being passed on to their children who are developing in the womb. And so these are the various types of historical and intergenerational adversities that children experience growing up. But then on top of that, you already have the historical trauma. You already have the intergenerational adversity of the cycles of poverty in generations. But then you have those questions that the sister raised. Did you witness a parent who had a substance abuse addiction? Did you have an incarcerated parent? Did you watch intimate partner violence? Those 10 questions, were you sexually abused? Those questions are one's adverse childhood experiences. And so now you have a foundation of trauma in a child's life, a child who then has to learn how to adapt to the traumas that they've experienced. We now know through this trauma that, or through this science rather, that when persons have Black histories of trauma and adversity, that trauma also informs their behavior. Because what happens is that when people go through what's called maltreatment, abuse, neglect, those types of things, that maltreatment causes, watch this, a normal response, which is called a maladaptive response to the maltreatment. So what happens is that people maladapt and their social, emotional, and cognitive functioning becomes dysfunctional, which means they make poor choices. They develop negative coping skills, getting on drugs, sexual addictions, looking for love and affirmation, all in the wrong places because of the adversity that they experience. You perhaps recall the brother who was in prison said, I experienced abuse and I kept asking myself, what was wrong with me? When people have those identity crises, that causes people to have substance use addictions, etc., which then leads to the health risks that are associated. When you are intoxicated, you're going to make decisions that aren't wise. You're going to get behind a vehicle and drive while you're drunk. You're going to perhaps experience the trauma of sexual abuse, being taken advantage of someone because you were intoxicated. We know the various risks that are associated as a result to the types of addictions that people develop in time, which we now know are normal responses to maltreatment, which we call maladaptive behavior. So when you have those layers and people now have increased health risks, increased behavioral risks, that now leads to disease, disabilities, and various social problems, which when left untreated, result in early deaths. So that is the bulk of this science of adversity and how it plays out in one's life early in life. I talked about maltreatment already. These slides just talk about, various examples of ACE attributable problems, alcohol abuse, chronic, or we call it COPD, coronary heart disease, depression, drug abuse, illicit drug use, fetal death, intimate partner violence, liver disease, mental health problems, obesity, sexual problems, smoking, unintended pregnancy, violence, workplace problems, brothers, that most of us are familiar with because we were raised, many of us, in contexts where our people experience the type of adversity that we've been mentioning previously. I'm looking for a slide. Here we go. So now I want you to think about that child who has that blackness out of the night that covers me, that child who is covered with the darkness of adversity in their lives. That child now, when they, from 0 to 17, their brain is being wired in ways for them to adapt to that environment. So if I'm born in the hood where there's always violence, that I'm always looking around and looking on my shoulder, I'm going to be edgy because I got to be, these are behaviors that I have to adapt in order to survive in a world that's filled with violence and trauma and various things going on in my community. And so a child who is born in the context of danger, that's the slide that you're looking at. You're thinking about two different children, a child who was born in the context of an adverse environment, or a child who is born more in a structural, safe environment, right? Their brains are literally being developed based upon their context. So a child who's born in the context of severe adversity or poverty, that child is developing a brain where they're being hardwired to be edgy or tempered, or we see ADHD being developed. All of these labels that now we are attributing to our children is because of normal ways that they've had to adapt because they have to raise themselves. The parent is strung out on drugs, so they still got to eat. So I got to figure out how I'm going to get food. This survival mode is being impacted based upon the level of stress or cortisol that's in the body, that toxic stress, because I'm always, as a child, now having to think about being an adult because I don't have responsible adults who are taking care of me because maybe my parents are working too much, or my parents are on drugs, or my parent is incarcerated. Now I'm taking on, as a child, stress that I should not have to endure. And when I'm in that mode of taking care of myself and maybe also my siblings, then now I'm developing toxic stress that is literally impacting my brain architecture in how I'm functioning as an individual. And so if I'm later incarcerated, it's likely because I did not receive the types of interventions that I needed early enough to curve that trajectory into a pipeline that obviously is not, in our current criminal justice system, is not designed for my rehabilitation, because it penalizes me and put me behind bars, treating me like a caged animal that I cannot heal from my traumas because of what I've already endured. And so now it just compounds the trauma, exacerbates the trauma, and then expects me to be a good citizen when I'm released, when there have been no structured interventions while I've been contained or incarcerated. So I'll stop there because that's the nuts and bolts of the science. And I'll share one last video before we open it up for questions, and that is why ITEJ. I mentioned to you that now there are a number of states that are becoming trauma-informed as a result of this science. When the science was conducted by Doctors Anda and Felitti in the 1990s, they literally were laughed at when the studies found that there was a direct correlation with maltreatment and maladaptation of how one's cognitive behavior responds to that. Well, now Dr. Anda's study has also been corroborated with other fields of science, that being neuroscience, which I talked about and alluded to earlier, how one's brain architecture is altered as a result of chronic stress and trauma, but then also at the field of epigenetics, where we now know, and is proven with scientific evidence, that adversity is passed down from one generation to the next. Well, so as you pointed out, Brother Asarifi, the pandemic has exposed all of this, because literally, as a result of the pandemic, trauma has exacerbated. The effects of trauma, everyone is feeling greater. But because we have now all of this historical research that predated the pandemic, and because of all of the nuances of science in neuroscience and epigenetics, we now know there's a direct correlation. The last thing I'll say to that point before I show the next video is we're now looking at the opioid settlement, that a lot of states right now are receiving hundreds of millions of dollars as a result of a societal problem that was primarily characterized as a rural white Caucasian problem, that being opioid overdose deaths as a result of this opioid epidemic. But because of recent science, according to the NIH and a recent publication from them, we now know that Blacks in America have died 4 to 6 times more than whites from this opioid epidemic. So when our states and communities are receiving all of these resources to address trauma, when traumas around the country are becoming trauma informed and policies are being developed as a result of this, the Institute of Trauma and Economic Justice, which already intimately understands the problem because most of us as African Americans live it every day, we are saying, where are our fair share of resources so that we can make sure, where is our economic justice so that we can ensure that the correct interventions are being made to curb the cycle of adversity in our communities, because now we know that there is a direct correlation with many of the societal problems that are largely impacting Black communities all across the country. And so ITEJ is working to develop what we call a comprehensive transdisciplinary strategy to address this approach. We need everybody. We need all hands on deck. This is not just behavioral health providers. This is the church. We need churches to stop shaming people about when they show up in our churches not looking like or sounding like our expectations of them. When we know that Christ said, whosoever will, let them come. Because only by letting them come and being themselves and using priestly listening to understand what's the root cause of what's causing their behavioral challenges, those are the types of tactical, practical strategies that churches are going to have to employ. We have to become safe spaces again and not run people away or make them feel afraid to be transparent about the things that they're dealing with in their lives. So whether it's the faith-based community, whether it's our educators, we need to educate our those running our school districts around what's called heart-centered learning, so that when you're in the classroom teaching little Johnny and little Johnny is acting out because of what little Johnny is going through at home, Susie, teacher, you're not being triggered because of Johnny's actions that's relating to some trauma that you may have had because of an experience that you were raised in that you were not aware of. So increasing adverse childhood experiences presents a mirror on us individually, so we all can reflect to better understand how trauma is impacting the decisions that we're making every day, so that we don't unknowingly pass that down to the next generation, particularly those of us who have influence over children that we are raising. But then also to ensure that because we want to keep our kids first, we want to not only treat adversity, we want to prevent it by making sure our kids are not continually being exposed to the types of adversity that causes these later in life consequences. And so that's who we are as an organization. And the last video is much shorter than the first one that I showed, and it'll share a bit more about who we are, and then we'll open up for any questions that you guys may have. Apologize for this delay here. This Zoom presentation is a little different. All right, here we go.
So you think you know Wix, but do you really? First up, we've got shit.
I am delighted and excited that you decided to take this day with us to share here in Detroit for our second ITEJ Bring Together event. As the founder and CEO of the Institute of Trauma and Economic Justice, our goal really is to create greater awareness to the realities of adverse childhood experiences, which we now know are the lead public health and safety crises in the country.
Well, I think this is a wonderful event, and I think it's really important to really understand some of the key components that drive human behavior, in particular as it affects our children and their adult lives as they get older. And so to really get a holistic understanding of ACEs and the impact that ACEs have on human behavior and on society in general was really helpful to, I think, all of us in the audience.
The goal of this meeting is to bring this information to the Detroit area so that we can begin to work in the community to wind down the cycle of adverse childhood experiences.
Our hope is to bring together the entire community, the microcosm of what is really involved in the ecosystem of that community with respect to religious leaders, educators, behavioral health specialists and providers, members of law enforcement, the judicial system, and we bring everyone together
to talk about this public health and public safety crisis in terms of the realities of how the impact of ACEs is affecting African Americans in urban communities, and then talk about what are some real solutions that we can do together in bringing together our perspectives on trauma and allowing empathy to really lead the way in helping to understand how difficult it is for persons to overcome these traumas when there's not a comprehensive strategy to address them.
I think it's very important that we in law enforcement understand the stresses that come about often in our young people, and that it's important that we know how to address that and with patience, with understanding. And so I think conferences like this and discussions like these are very much needed.
One of the most memorable statements made was that trauma from stress changes the architecture of the brain. The complexity and the intersectionality of the stress of African Americans is a long list. All of this creates multiple traumas.
The most important piece is that we know what it leads to, what the consequences are. Not only that, but also the consequences that it has on physical health, on their lifestyle, on the type of employment they would keep. It affects all domains of life. So it's extremely important for us to have that awareness. So then that's the first step.
This ACEs conference was just amazing. I am so motivated to take this back to my families that I serve at the Ruth Ellis Center. And I am super excited about serving families and working in my community and doing things to help build others as well as being built myself.
Thank you. Go with peace and go with love.
All right, brothers. So that's our presentation today. Thank you for the time. It was just a short, brief presentation. I hope for next steps, potentially, if you want me to just get rid of those, I'll get those out of the way. I think that it would be prudent for the chapter to consider having a full, what's called NEAR presentation. NEAR is an acronym that stands for Neuroscience, Epigenetics, ACEs, and Resilient Communities. That presentation is what I provide as a master trainer of trainers in ACEs. And then as people get that training, it really is a wow factor. This short presentation is probably a wow factor, but when we really roll back our sleeves and talk about this through the NEAR presentation, it really motivates people to want to dig deeper. And so I strongly advise that you consider at some point receiving the full NEAR presentation. And then secondly, I have three. The second would be consider establishing a NEAR master trainer of trainer cohort, which means that just as I'm a master trainer of trainers, there might be brothers in the chapter who might want to also consider becoming master trainers of trainers. You can take this presentation into all various sectors. It can, really be an opportunity for you guys to educate the greater Massachusetts state if they're not already engaged in a lot of the work here around ACEs. And then the third would be, certainly we would love your support through ITEJ. Not only is it being led by your brother, an alpha man here, but literally our board are members of Alpha currently. And so we believe that this is something that we as Black men should also take as a shining light in leading our communities to heal and to also begin to address some of the real issues that oftentimes our families don't like to discuss. And so as a Black pastor, as a Black man, as a faith leader, as your brother, I'm here and I'm hoping that you all will be here for us in trying to get more of these, what we call ITEJ bring together events. So the same video you saw that was in Detroit, we're doing one on the campus of Simmons College of Kentucky on November the 2nd, where our alpha brother, Dr. Kevin Cosby, is the president. We're doing this again in Lansing, Michigan on November the 30th in partnership with the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. They're going to stream it all across the state of Michigan. And so this is the work that we're doing, and we would love to partner with you guys in any way to assist in getting you this information, but also working to train you on ways to develop strategies to provide programs and services that can help to wind down the effects of ACEs in your community. So again, with that, thank you again. And if there's any questions,
Oh, goodness. Thank you so much. Brother Peyton, would you go over the NEAR acronym again, so that we can have that?
Yeah, so NEAR, like you and I are near, well, we're not near because we're zooming, but NEAR is the acronym for neuroscience, epigenetics, ACEs, which is the little bit deeper dive on ACEs and its direct correlation to substance use and to cancer, to diabetes, all the things that you saw in that slide for ACE attributable risk. We go take a deeper dive. We talk about how students are impacted in the classroom as a result of ACEs. And then we talk about resilience, and that's what the R stands for. And recognizing that we do have an uphill battle, but it's not a battle that does not yield hope. In fact, it yields significant hope, because we know that what is predictable is also preventable. And because ACEs provide a predictable pattern, we can provide the right types of evidence-based, data-driven programs and services and interventions that we know are working, that right now, many of our communities are not receiving these resources. And we can lead the way in championing the cause for ensuring that our politicians and our leaders give us the financial resources that our communities deserve, and not ignore these issues that are severely impacting urban communities. Again, they rally around when the media portrays issues as a white issue, but when it affects African Americans and people of color, we often see the very disproportionate response. And I believe that it's time out for that. I don't think that we should make any excuses for that anymore. And I think that we need to begin to demand that as taxpayers and contributors to our government, that we are receiving the resources that we need to help our communities to heal.
I love the presentation so much. Thank you so much. We at times here in TIL, at least I think sometimes that we are an education leading chapter. Certainly Brother Lightfoot is in education, Brother Washington, and we lean heavily into education. Can you say just a little bit more about maybe what you found in your work for how these ACEs and this conversation about trauma is having an impact in schools, particularly with our Black and brown kids? Can you just say a little more about how that's kind of what you've been finding or what you've been seeing?
Absolutely. So the data is pretty much available now, particularly around the curriculum that I mentioned earlier. It's called heart-centered learning. It's really all about developing empathy. If you listen to the woman in the first video that I showed, what she said something powerful. She knowing that she benefited from her own traumas being a white woman, she said, "I see myself in you," right? So what heart-centered learning does is it's a type of an approach where the entire district is trained on how not only to work with children who are impacted by ACEs, but to also recognize their own ACEs and to begin the work of getting the interventions that are needed in a safe way to be able to start healing in our classrooms. Because like I said, these ACEs does not just affect children. You got a whole lot of grown folks and folks in their 70s and 80s and 90s who are still being affected by ACEs, traumas that they have suppressed, that they have not dealt with, but it's manifesting in ways that inform their behavioral decisions as well as their health conditions as well. So heart-centered learning on your foundational educational levels, preschool to 12th grade, but then also in our HBCUs or in our post-secondary education, there are ways and strategies that we also can increase strategies that we know are working. I mentioned the fact that we're going to Simmons College of Kentucky in November. Simmons, which is an HBCU, there in Louisville, Kentucky, has the highest ACE prevalence in the nation, and Kentucky has the highest incarceration rate on the planet. And so Simmons right now, Simmons College is the only HBCU that currently is educating 200 incarcerated persons. 200 incarcerated persons. Right now, 200 prisoners. We don't call them prisoners, we call them incarcerated persons. In 3 different prisons in Kentucky are receiving an education and will have earned degrees once they finish serving their time because of a special program that's taking place at Simmons, and it's through a Second Chance Pell Grant. Well, we need to say, how can we make certain that we're expanding this access? If we know that a significant number of our African Americans are incarcerated, how can we ensure that we know that there are evidence-based programs that are working and educational programs that are working? Why can't we expand these types of access if we're spending $70,000 on incarcerated persons a year, and we're spending less than half of that for children who are in our pre-K through 12th grade educational systems? So the level of fiscal responsibility and inequity is to a place now where, if we're really serious about developing strategies to help our society to move forward and make the progress that it needs to make in building vibrant, equitable communities, then this is the work that we're going to have to be engaged in doing. And it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be a process, but it starts with these types of opportunities of providing the level of education that help to inform, and then hopefully also build the type of empathy that will drive the political will that we need to get people to make the right decisions.
I think that's awesome. Here, and we've talked a bit offline about various things going on here in Springfield, Massachusetts, and my chapter brothers know how passionate I am about the Springfield Alphas assisting things in Springfield. I'm convinced that there is a lot of unrecognized, untreated, unaddressed trauma in our city, not just among people of color, but certainly among people of color. We've had some conversations, that some of that for us has been, our police, segments of our police force and political things like that. And I see it as a pastor, as I'm sure you do. Can you just say something about maybe some of the ways that you recognize trauma just even in everyday conversations? Because I think part of the conversation that we don't always have is, what do we do when we think somebody is showing signs that they've been traumatized? Can you just say a little bit about what you see and how you respond?
Absolutely. So ironically, when I first had the concept of ITEJ, it started with a panel discussion that I had in Pontiac, Michigan several years ago with a woman named Barb Hankey, who is currently the lead of public services for all of Oakland County. Also, Robert Reed, who at the time was the executive deputy attorney general for the state of Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is now a trauma-informed state, and Robert's job was to develop policies for making Pennsylvania a trauma-informed state. And part of that was thinking about reimagining corrections and also reimagining how our police officers engage with the community. And so there's certainly there's opportunity for law enforcement agencies to develop the types of resources to get them trained on ACEs. When we had our first ITEJ Bring Together event in Oakland County, not only was our sheriff, Michael Bouchard was present, but we also had his trainer for Oakland County. The same thing happened in Wayne County. I think you saw Sheriff Washington from Wayne County on the video. They had their leaders of their training, who runs all their training for their departments. And now they are interested in getting their officers trained on this, because officers need to understand that when they are about to make a split-second decision, we need to make certain that they're not dealing with a lot of stress, right? Because now, as a result of this science, we know that when people have high stress levels, it's called cortisol. When your cortisol levels are extremely high, going back to that the video of the child, maybe I'll just pull it up if we have a couple seconds here. This one slide. This slide here, when you look at that fight, flight, or freeze response, all of us, when we're placed in moments, have to make a split-second decision sometimes, right? That's your am I going to fight? Am I going to freeze? Or am I going to run away, right? Well, these decisions are what officers make in split-second decisions when they have their fingers on the trigger. And so when I have high stress in my body, because, maybe I'm working a lot of overtime, maybe I got family issues going on at home, maybe I haven't dealt with my own trauma as an officer, right? And I'm coming to work high stressed. Well, when I'm have my finger on the trigger and I have to make a split-second decision, I have high cortisol, that I may not be making the right decision. And that young brother who may not have had a real gun, but it could have been a water gun, is now dead on the street because I made a decision that was a misjudgment, because my judgment decision was a result of my high levels of stress. So literally, I just developed a partnership with the University of Michigan School of Medicine, where we're about to do an intervention, a pilot intervention, where we're going to be measuring cortisol for African-American men, to talk about how our stress may impact our parenting as fathers. But potentially, if we measure cortisol of officers, maybe that can be preventative measures to ensure that when our officers are out on the street, that they are actually in a place where they have their mental well-being that's not being impacted as a result of their stress. So there are a number of different ways. So when we have our ITEJ Bring Together events, we have panel discussions that bring up these topics, and then we have breakout discussions where those officers and community members can engage each other around these conversations to then start thinking about what might be some creative strategies that we might want to consider as a result of improving the ways that we do community policing. So that's just one example of several that we're currently working and developing as a result of these ITEJ Bring Together events that we're currently doing.
That is awesome. We've got a few minutes left, brothers, Brother Asarifi or others, if you have a comment or question. I know there were some comments and questions in the chat maybe as well, but brothers, what say you? What questions might we have? Oh, it's hard stuff to talk about.
First of all, brother, amazing presentation. My first question to you is, when we're talking about early intervention and everything, right? We're talking about the development of the amygdala with flight or freeze. At what point do you think intervention is suitable, right? Because we're still talking about developing children. So when do you think that we should attack that trauma and try to get them help?
Well, thank you for your question, brother. I think it's an important one, because it's like, we have this mountain that we need to move, and it seems like it's overwhelming, but it really happens on all levels, right? And so, as a pastor, right, on my level, I can preach sermons that help build empathy and help talk about, instead of, one of the things that we say in our presentations, and I believe Dr. Anda came up with this in the NEAR presentation, and that is, we should stop asking what's wrong with people and start asking what happened to people. Because the more we start asking what happened to people, then that will cause us less to judge people and to ignore the problems that people are experiencing. But then that will help us to develop not only the understanding that we need, but that understanding will hopefully develop the empathy that's needed to get the people the real help and support that they need. And so once we are engaging with people that we may understand they've been impacted by trauma, when we become knowledgeable ourselves and begin to change our disposition, automatically we become force multipliers in changing the energy around creating spaces where people can be less stressed out. Because if I feel like I'm going to be judged, or I feel threatened, or whatever the case may be in an environment, then that only increases my stress and then also impacts how I respond to it. So I think it starts on all levels. And so there are intervention strategies that churches need to think about, the types of theologies, patterns and practices and programs that they're going to offer their members, whether it's on a child's level. I mean, you can have it, you can have a ministry for pregnant mothers and talk about their impact, and certainly pregnant mothers who are concerned about their own bodies. And, we know that there's a rise in the rate of African-American women that are dying, while pregnant, and their children are dying as a consequence, and largely because of stress. Well, if we have interventions that are helping our mothers, the image of ITEJ, that's the symbol that we have here, is a mother and a child, because we believe that's sacred, right? That's our future. That's our legacy. So we want to make certain that we are protecting our women and giving and causing them to be less stressed in society, particularly when they're raising children, right? So how does that inform human resource practices? of what are employers doing when they have people that are pregnant, right? So on all levels, this information is critically important, and that's why we each have to be thoughtful about the ways that we go about developing this comprehensive transdisciplinary strategy to get this research out in ways that all of us can do all of our part in helping to make our world and society a better place. So I know it was kind of all over the place. It wasn't a real direct question, but or answer rather, because it really is on multiple levels.
No, that was perfect. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Brother Peyton, there is a Brother Bradley put a question in the chat that I think is worth reading, since we have some people that don't have access to the chat. I'll read it. Brother Bradley says, I'm also interested in how people in the professional class respond to the kind of trauma that you're describing. It seems that there are a lot of high-functioning, traumatized people masking unhealed wounds with success. Can you speak to that?
I'll just say amen, brother. Amen. That's the absolute truth, because the reality is everybody's dealing with something, right? But because we don't have safe spaces, people often don't feel like they can be transparent or honest about the wounds and the trauma that we go through. And I think it's also because of what the brother said in the video, who was incarcerated, right? We all, as Black men, right? You shouldn't cry. You go through things, and you're supposed to be a man, toughen up, deal with it, suck it up. And then we have wounds and things that are left unhealed, but we go on with this face like everything's okay, because we are trying to meet a toxic masculinity society that suggests that this is what it means to be a man. And whether that's expectation is on men, right? We can think about those expectations on that we put on all people, right? And I think the greatest expectation that we need to start putting on individuals is not an expectation of a person's role in life or society, right? But their expectations first in their humanity. We are humans before we are anything else. We are human before we identify with our Blackness or race. We are human before we deal with our gender. We are human before we deal with the titles that feed our ego, right? When we strip all those things away, it comes down to our basic humanity. And when we can begin to be honest with ourselves about the things that we deal with and how it affects us, then hopefully that will give us what we need, right? The Lord Jesus said it this way: love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself. But people can't love their neighbors as themselves if they have not learned how to love themselves first. And you cannot love yourself first if you are not willing to deal with the unhealed areas of your life, because it's the unhealed areas of your life that often hold you back from becoming your better self. And when you are your better self, you are better. When Keon is Keon's better self, I'm a better pastor, I'm a better man, I'm a better father, I'm a better entrepreneur, I'm a better business leader, I'm a better educator. I am better in every facet of my life. And I didn't come to the realization of that until I had to go through a severe traumatic episode, right? Where my childhood trauma of being sexually abused by a relative played out throughout my life, causing sexual identity crisis, causing, being a Black pastor, not being able to, think that I could be fully transparent in talking about my struggles because of what's associated or how members of the LGBTQI plus community have been demonized as a result of sexual identity, or being able to talk about areas of my own vulnerability because there's an expectation that I'm just supposed to be some superhero, right? Without giving time and attention to being super in my humanity and giving myself the self-care and grace that I need to deal with my own adversity. And that's what's required. We need a world of more grace, where we give ourselves grace and space to know that it's okay to not be okay. But when we recognize that we are not okay, there's hope.
in getting the types of interventions that we need to heal. And that's the blessing that God gives us every day when he wakes us up, new mercies, because he gives us an opportunity to get today right. We can do better today in our today than what we did on our tomorrow, but it's up to us to do it. And that's why I thank Brother Pope for reminding us of that powerful poem, because we are the captains of our fate and we got to do the work.
Excellent, excellent. Can we, brothers, just give a virtual or a visual round of applause for Brother Peyton being what a wonderful presentation. So wonderful, so excited. Another question there, but yeah, okay. We thank you, of course. Brother Pope has another question about nature versus nurture we can talk about at some time once we're officially off our time, maybe, but we appreciate that. All of you, again, we just thank you so much for joining in. And yeah, he was getting ready to he's preaching out here. Yeah, listen, I ain't mad at you. It's great. I need a word. I need a word. We all need a word. That's wonderful. Listen, we thank all of you for tuning in. This is not, and the idea of Concept of Progress, this is not a one-time thing. This is a conversation that we hope to continue in our chapter, in our community and beyond. Brother Peyton has given us, I think, Brother President and all of us, some great ideas, some areas where we as alpha men can impact our communities and not just here in Springfield, but even maybe beyond that. And so maybe we have some ideas about finding those organizations doing trauma work in our area and connecting with them. And maybe we talked offline a bit about perhaps joining those organizations that are focused on men's mental health. We have some of those here in the community. I know, Brother Peyton, there's an organization here, MOCA, Men of Color Health Awareness. Perhaps we do something with them. We've got some brothers who are affiliated with the Boys and Girls Club or the Urban League. So many opportunities, brothers, for us to do the work of Alpha that our brother, Reverend Dr. Keon Peyton, has told us about. And again, his website is in the chat, www.itej.org. Please check that out. And if you are so led, make a donation to that great work. And speaking of donations, the Springfield Alphas, we have our own 501c3 organization, the Lee B. Rebels Scholarship and Mentorship Foundation. It puts on our oratorical contest. Brother Peyton, we might have to bring you up for the oratorical contest to be a judge. The foundation, we have an opportunity to give out scholarships as a result of that oratorical contest. It's really cool. That's the main thing that the organization does. Brother James Lightfoot is currently the president of the Lee B. Rebels Scholarship and Mentorship Foundation. And we would encourage you, particularly if you enjoyed this program, you believe in the powerful work that the Men of Alpha are doing in Springfield and beyond, we encourage you to please make a donation to the Lee B. Rebels Scholarship and Mentorship Foundation. If you're here with us on Zoom, Brother Lightfoot can put the Cash App information in the chat and we will make sure to share it with you. You can also, of course, go to the Springfield Alpha's website and make a donation, indicate in the donation that it's for the foundation, and we'll make sure that our education foundation gets it. Every little bit helps. We are literally making a difference for young men of color here in the Springfield area, and we would love for each and every one of you to be a part of that as well. Again, the Lee B. Rebels Scholarship and Mentorship Foundation, the nonprofit mentorship arm of the Theta Iota Lambda chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. Please consider a donation. We're so glad that you've been with us. Again, thank you, Brother Peyton. You really inspired us and spoke to us today. Thank you, as always, Brother President Asarifi, for your support. Brother Lightfoot, thank you. Big shout out to Brother Denzel Washington, the real Denzel Washington, for all of his support and helping us on the technical side here. Again, Concept of Progress, we're going to keep it going. So this is not going to be the last time we have this conversation. Thank you all for tuning in.